Does God exist? And we say, well, but there is so much to see that actually points in that direction. And so for us, starting from the Christian viewpoint, that really is not a question on which theology starts, because theology proceeds from the point that God is, God exists. And of course, you will not be able to talk about God unless God actually exists. The mere mention of the name God, the fact that the idea comes to mind, the fact that you can even think of him, shows that God himself does exist. And I begin by reflecting briefly about the reaction of the psalmist to this kind of view in times past. And Psalm 14, for instance, says, it's only a fool that will say that God does not exist, simply because the psalmist has taken that view, that position, and from his own experience, his own encounter in the world, he knows that God does exist. So how can I really reason or query the existence of God? To ask whether God exists is to ask whether I truly exist. It is because I exist that I can think about why I exist or whether there is God. So the question again is like asking whether my father or my mother exist, because I could not have existed without my father or my mother. So in reality, we can continue to go further and further and to ask, who was there before my father or before my mother? Who was there before their father, before their mother, before their parents? And we can keep going on and on and on. But then we come to a point where we can go no further. And we must be asking, so what was behind my mother, my father, their great-parents and great-grandparents, and you continue to name it and go on to the very, very end. And you must get to a point where you want to ask, so where do we go from here? Who lies behind all this? And surely for us, we must know that God, who is the ground of all beings, is the one who lives, who is there. And thinking about that reminds me very much of what Isaiah the prophet says. And Isaiah asks that question as well, where he says, have you not known, have you not heard, that the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. So here you're talking about God, the everlasting one, the one behind whom there is no other one. And he is the one who has been the first one, out of whom all other things have come into being. So for us, that is very important. So God is the ground of all beings, and he is there as the one from whom all other things have come. Now this argument undoubtedly portends some difficulties for people who would like to dismiss this as inaccurate or imprecise. However, it appears that even such opponents have not successfully propounded any other that is not fraught with even greater probabilities and imprecision. Now the Christian faith is grounded in revelation. Right from the start of the Hebrew Bible, for instance, the opening makes a clear statement about the person of God, and from him all other things flow. And you find the Bible beginning with, in the beginning, God. So talking about creation, the Bible starts with, in the beginning. So which means even before that creation, there has been God himself. And again, you cannot continue to ask the question as to whether who made God. And if you ask the same question, then the question will be, who made him? Who made the one who made God? And that question can continue. But then you've got to get to a point where we cannot continue to ask indefinitely. There is no way we can continue to ask without getting to a point when we find that we've really got to stop and ask the question, isn't that the source of all beings? Isn't that the source of creation? And so Yahweh, creator of the universe, brought it all into being simply by his own command. And you talk about stars. You talk about the light in the world that lightens the darkness, which the darkness has not overcome. And this is a God who indeed has chosen to reveal himself. Now, this is not simply an idea, but God is also personal. And this is very important for us, even from the Christian theology point, that he is the one who has chosen to reveal himself So it goes beyond being an idea, an imagination, but he's one who has chosen to be in relationship with people from the very beginning. And that is why you talk about the fathers of faith. You talk about Abraham, you talk about Moses, you talk about so many others in scriptures who have actually, in their own generations, mediated between God and human beings. And they could not have done this if there was no personal encounter with God. And in each case, they always proceeded on a kind of understanding between them and God. Because God gives instructions and then they do obey. They proceed on that basis. Think about Abraham for a minute. Where he was most comfortable in life, God did ask him to move on. And he did respond. There is no way to simply respond to an idea unless there is a personal relationship there. And this went on. And come again to Moses, and there is another revelation and manifestation of God. God who revealed himself in the burning bush. When the bush was burning and yet it was not consumed. The God who spoke there. And this for him was a very curious experience. Moses had to ask, so who is it? Who is sending me on this mission? And there he said, I am. Ego eimi, I am. And this means, I am who I am. I am who I am. And I will be who I will be. And as we go along, you will continue to know me. I will continue to reveal myself unto you. And so there is the question of faith here. Faith and revelation on which Christian theology and Christian relationship proceed. And for us, that is very important. So that personal relationship, that manifestation of God himself, goes beyond any form of argument, however strong, because there is a link between God revealing himself to mankind. So ultimately for us, the question of faith and authority with which we accept the revelation of God is very important. And this is a theological premise on which St. Anselm of Canterbury based his own theological experience. Anselm proceeded on the premise of faith, seeking understanding. Anselm of Canterbury never intended to prove the existence of God simply from philosophical view, but he believed that in understanding God, first by faith, then you can take the step of seeking to explain, seeking to find out who he really is. So there has to be faith that believes in the God who reveals himself before we can take the next step forward. So simply seeking a philosophical or scientific answer to the existence of God simply does not answer the question, because it leads us nowhere. There has to be a relationship, there has to be faith, out of which other things could proceed. And that simply was the experience of Anselm of Canterbury. And for him this was important when he developed his theology about Godless homo, why God become human. And for him, it was part of the search for the understanding of God's own revelation. But I'll go on quickly to explain that even within Christian theology and philosophical thinking, down the edges, there have also been attempts to engage with this critical question in philosophical terms. And I'm just going to highlight one or two, as depending on the time this evening. And one is one that reminds us of the concept of idea. The mere thought about the fact of the existence of God. Now the challenge here is, can you actually imagine something that does not exist? Even if you were to experience or imagine something that does not exist, you must be asking the question, why are you thinking about this? To fathom something that does not exist must be born out of your own experience. So that in itself shows that that thing does exist in one form or another. And Berkeley is well remembered for this kind of idea in terms of reminding us of the view, the conception of a particular viewpoint about who God is. But we go further to remind ourselves that in Christian theology, we not only celebrate a personal God, we not only celebrate an idea, we not only celebrate that belief, but we celebrate the climax of divine revelation. And for us, Jesus Christ proves that beyond any other philosophical argument or debate, because he embodies the deity for us. And the scripture says that in him dwells the fullness of the deity. And John, in his own time, writing even for the benefit of Stoics and philosophers of his days, speaks about the Son of God who has come to reveal God. And he says, no one has ever seen God, but the Son of God, the only Son of God, who has revealed himself. And the scriptures continue to say to us, even in many places too, that the prophets have spoken about God, they've revealed God in so many ways, but in Jesus Christ comes that perfect expression of who God is. So for us, the question of whether God exists really is not the question, but in fact, it is, do we know God? And how do we know him? And I'll go on quickly to just highlight one or two other things. One is what has become or come to be known as a cosmological argument about the existence of God. Argument about the world in which we live. And it takes me back to one of my initial points about how can I actually query the existence of God? When I look at your faces, all of you sitting here tonight, I am more convinced that God exists because you reveal the beauty that no one else can actually explain away. You reveal, you manifest the beauty that something definitely lies behind your existence. And this again goes back into looking around the whole world, thinking about creation itself, thinking about all that there is in the world. And we want to begin to look at so many features in the natural world about which St. Aquinas talks about in the 13th century, and looking at nature as a way of beginning to understand the beauty of the world, but also the power that lies behind it. So when you look at the world itself, the cosmology, the composition of the world, and you look at it and must ask the question, how did this all come into being? Of course, skeptics are going to be able to tell us of so many other ideas and scientific proofs of how many of them actually started and how they started. But then the question continues, and who started them? And where were they? Whatever theory anybody were to hold about the creation of the universe itself is a manifestation to us of the beauty of creation and the power of the great creator. We go further to look at what is often known as the kind of argument by design. And you look at even the order of the world itself and the way in which things are structured in the world in which we live, the way in which systems work, the way in which situations and circumstances of the world, the weather, the climate, and all the things therein, the way they manifest and work. And then, of course, we must be asking, and so how do they work in that pattern? Talk about the wristwatch. What necessarily comes to mind is the wristwatch is designed for a particular purpose. You suddenly find it and it's working in a particular rhythm, in a particular way, in a particular function. And surely you must be asking, this thing has been designed to fulfill a particular purpose. But our arguments must go beyond that. And we must ask, so who was behind this? We must be going to ask, how much more? Or who was designed behind this particular design? If it has been designed to work in a particular way, in a particular fashion, then surely there must be somebody or a designer behind the design. And this is very important. And I'll quickly talk about, once again, about the God who actually brought all things into being. And we ask him and say, so what, the nature of causality, the cause and effect that is noticeable in the world, the cause and effect that is noticeable in the world, and how these things work. And we can begin to go further behind them to say what was responsible for this particular one. And we find cause and effect. But for us, God is the uncaused cause. And you get there, and you must recognize this God, this person, this personality who is behind all these things, and you cannot go further. So he is not caused by anything. And in fact, people have asked, if you want to try and find out who he really is, how about trying to understand his personality? How about asking whether he was caused by anything? But you get to a point when you can't actually find any further answer to that. This is because he wants to find a solution to that, then he fails to be God. He fails to be God who is all-powerful and is able to deal with situations that he has put in the world. So I'll just stop there meanwhile, and I hope I'll be able to come back later on. But for us, the question of whether God does exist or not is not the issue, but actually, have we taken the step or made an attempt to know him? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen Fagbemi. Back call on Brother Adam Deen, please.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, I'd like to begin by thanking the Islamic Society at Sunderland University to invite me. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for turning up today. David Hume is noted to have said that the wise man proportions his belief according to the available evidence. And what I'd like to do this evening is argue that there are more reasons to believe in God than not to believe in God. And I want to present 4 arguments this evening. The first is that God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe. Now, typically atheists will deny the existence of a God by postulating that the universe is eternal. If the universe is eternal, that means it has no beginning. If it has no beginning, then there's no need for anything or any God to bring it into existence. However, I believe that there are good reasons philosophically and scientifically to argue that the universe does have a beginning. Firstly, the idea, philosophically, the idea of an eternal universe presents to us insuperable difficulty. For if the universe is eternal and does not have a beginning, that would mean that there is an infinite series of past events. That would mean that the present, if we chose arbitrarily any moment in time, the present, there would be an infinite series of past events. But this creates problems, and we can illustrate this by the given illustration. Suppose I needed to borrow £1, and I asked Brother Wakas for £1, and he agreed and said, yes, but I must also borrow £1. And then he asks Stephen for £1, and he replies the same thing, and Stephen asks Philip Nathan, and he replies the same thing, ad infinitum, and this continues. And the question is, would I ever receive £1? The answer is obviously no. In the same way, if there are an infinite series of past events before the present would never have actualized. And this problem is also referred to as the problem of traversing the infinite. Now, this same confirmation of the universe having a beginning is confirmed by science. Recent studies in cosmology and astrophysics now shows us that the universe does have a beginning, that the universe is approximately 13.5 billion years old, and that the beginning results in the beginning of all time, space, and energy. The British physicist P.C.W. Davies explains, the coming into being of the universe as discussed in modern science is not just a matter of imposing some sort of organisation upon a previous incoherent state, but literally coming into being of all physical things from nothing. But then how do we suppress the inevitable question? How does something come from nothing? And this problem was captured by Professor Anthony Kennedy from Oxford University. A proponent of the Big Bang Theory, at least, if he is an atheist, must believe the universe came from nothing by nothing. Now suppose that you heard a loud bang behind me, and one of you asked, what caused that bang? And I just replied, nothing. It happened by itself. No one in this room, including Philip Nathan, would agree that that was a reasonable answer. That would be unintelligible. Now, what is true of the little bang is also true of the big bang. And we can summarize the argument as follows. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. My second argument, that God makes sense, or is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. During the last 30, 40 years, scientists have been astonished to discover that the initial conditions of the universe were delicately and exquisitely fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life. What we know now is that life-prohibiting universes are far more probable. When we take the initial conditions of the universe and convert them into mathematical equations, what we find are these constants and arbitrary quantities that have to fall within a narrow life-permitting range. Now, we have three types of explanations for these initial conditions being fine-tuned. The first is natural necessity, natural law. The problem with this alternative is that it flies in the face of known physics. The British physicist, again, explains, he says, there is nothing in present ideas about the laws of initial conditions remotely to suggest that their consistency with the laws of physics would imply uniqueness. Far from it. It seems then the physical universe does not have to be the way it is. It could have been otherwise. The very fact that we have such a wide range of possibilities of these constants and arbitrary quantities falling within a range shows that it is not natural necessity, for the very fact that that if it was natural necessity, then it would be impossible to be any other way. Now, because we do have such a range, then it shows that this alternative won't do. What about the idea that these constants and arbitrary quantities fall within the narrow life-permitting range by chance? The problem with this is that it is a position that cannot be reasonably faced, because the odds are so against it. I'll give you an example. Stephen Hawking has estimated that the rate of the expansion of the universe 1 second after the Big Bang was smaller by 1 part out of 100, 1,000, million, the universe would have recollapsed into a hot fireball. P.C.W. Davies has estimated that the strength of the weak force and strength of gravity essential for the development of the universe was smaller or altered by 1 part out of 10 to the 100th power. It would have been impossible for the universe to sustain intelligent life. That's 1 followed by 100 zeros. Now, it's important that you understand that if we alter these constants and arbitrary quantities, that it's not that we would have life, a very, very different type of life. Life is not as we know it, currently know it, but rather that it would make life impossible. Even chemistry wouldn't be able to exist. Atoms would not form. But that's not all. That's not all. There are approximately 50 of these constants and arbitrary quantities that not only have to fall within a life-permitting range, but also have to work in relation to one another. Now, the figures that we're talking about are 1 part of 10 to the 100th power, very abstract figures. Let me give you an illustration. Suppose we take North America, a continent the size of North America, and we fill the continent with coins going all the way to the moon. That's 239,000 miles upwards. Then we take 1 billion other equal-sized continents, and we do exactly the same thing. Now, what we do then is to take a red coin, mix it amongst 1 billion coins, and ask someone to find the red coin blindfolded. Now, the odds of that happening are 1 chance out of 10 to the power of 37. That's 1 followed by 37 zeros. Now that is astronomically small, smaller than the numbers that we're talking about. Now remember I said there were approximately 50 of these constants and arbitrary quantities. The eminent cosmologist Donald Page has estimated that for all the constants and arbitrary quantities to fall within a life-permitting range, the probabilities of that are 1 part out of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. This number is just too big for us to even comprehend. Roger Penrose from Oxford University said that we couldn't write a number down. Why? We couldn't write this number down. Why? Because the number of elementary particles would not be enough in the given universe. So it seems then this alternative that it falls in, that all of the life-emitting ranges falling by chance is not a position that one can sustain. So then that leaves us with the third alternative, which is design. So I can conclude by saying that the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe are either natural necessity, chance, or design. They are not natural necessity, chance, therefore design. My third argument is that God makes the best explanation for objective morality. Can I have my water, please? Thank you. God is the best explanation for objective morality. Now, when I speak of objective morality, what I mean is that there exists good and evil, independent and valid whether we believe in it or not. For example, to torture a child for fun is objectively morally evil. Suppose now the whole world was populated with deranged individuals that thought it was a good act to torture a child for fun. Would it still be evil? Yes, it would still be objectively morally evil because it doesn't matter whether we believe in it or not. That's what we mean by objectivity. Now, traditionally, objective moral values were grounded in God. That's what gave them their objectivity. Now, if God does not exist, then what grounds do we have? What reasons can we have to believe in objective morality? Now, a typical version of atheism is naturalism. Naturalism believes that what exists in the world can be discovered by using our scientific methods. That all that exists is matter and energy. Non-material entities do not exist. But the problem here is this. When we talk about moral properties, good and evil, right and wrong, they do not share the same properties as physical entities. Moral properties do not have a size. They do not have a weight, a touch, a smell. None of those properties. You cannot find morality in a test tube. You cannot conduct an experiment in a lab and discover good and evil in a test tube. So how do we locate these non-material properties, such as good and evil? The late J.L. Mackie from Oxford University, a prominent atheist philosopher, confessed, moral properties constitute so what a cluster of qualities and relations that they are most unlikely not to have arisen in the ordinary course of events, without an all-powerful God to create them. What's Mackie saying here? He's saying, look, if these entities, good and evil, did exist, then it would be very difficult to explain them in a world made up with physics and chemistry. Suppose we were to go back to the beginning of the universe, where the universe just popped into existence. We don't believe that, but we'll just argue that for the time being. Just popped into existence, and we had these particles, and these particles formed to create galaxies and planets, and one of these planets had the necessary and sufficient conditions to sustain intelligent life. Now, if I were to ask, why is it that intelligent life? Can we explain why intelligent life is carbon-based? Then we can explain it quite easily with this naturalistic backdrop of creation, very easily. But now, if I were to ask, then where is good and evil? That would be very difficult when all that we have is physicalist terms like physics and chemistry and biology. How do we locate these entities known as good and evil? The problem is this. The history of the universe, approximately 13.5 billion years of it, is what is the case. It is a description. Now, what the atheist is arguing, those that believe in objective morality, that's arbitrarily 10%, the last 10% of the history that we have with the arrival of Homo sapiens, and suddenly we have these good and evil existing. That just seems to be incongruent with the naturalistic story of events. If you start with is, all that you can have is. You can't have an ought. Moreover, in the absence of God, God does not exist, then what is man after all? All he can be is a byproduct of a lengthy evolutionary process. He's an animal, an advanced primate. But ladies and gentlemen, the problem here is that animals are not moral agents. The animal kingdom does not have a moral paradigm. For example, when we see an eagle steal a fish from the claws of another eagle, we don't accuse the eagle of stealing. When a shark forcefully copulates with another shark, we don't accuse the shark of rape. None of those things are forbidden. But why aren't they forbidden in human relationships or human affairs? Massimo Paducci, a biologist, writes, he says, what we call homicide, rape, or even infanticide is very common amongst different types of animals. Lions, for example, commit infanticide on a regular basis. Now, are these kinds of acts to be condemned? I don't even know what that means, because the lion doesn't understand what morality is. Morality is an invention of human beings. There is no such thing as objective morality. Now, certainly, acts like rape and incest are disapproved in our societies, and rightfully so. However, that does not mean anything. All that they are just taboos. The reason that we're against such acts are because they go against our social conventions, like driving on the left side of the road or right side of the road. A well-known humanist, Paul Kurtz, writes in The Forbidden Fruit, the moral principles that govern our behaviour are rooted in habit and customs, feeling and fashion. Habit, customs, feeling and fashion. Now I ask the question, if that is the case, if that's all our morality is, then what do we say to the person who wants to flout in the face of customs, feeling and fashion, and he wants to commit rape? What can we possibly say to that person? If he does such things, then all he is doing is acting unfashionably, unsociably. Like someone, for example, who passes wind at the dinner table. Don't know why the lights went off there. I didn't pass wind, by the way. So all that happens to our notion of morality in the absence of God is that morality becomes just a spin-off of socio-biological evolution and just subjective expressions of personal taste. There is no such thing as objective moral truth if God does not exist. However, I think all of us here, atheist, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, of all sorts, believe deep down that objective morality does exist. We do believe that there is a significant difference between showing love to a child and also torturing a child. There is an objective difference, and objective morality does exist. So I will argue, if God does not exist, then if God exists, then objective morality exists. If objective morality exists, therefore God exists. How much time do I have? 5 minutes, okay. Fourth argument for this evening. I want to argue that God is the best explanation for the authorship of the Quran. When we look at chapter 2, verse 23 of the Quran, the author of the Quran asks this: "And if you are in doubt about which we have revealed to our servant, then bring one chapter like it." The author of the Quran is setting a falsification test to test the divinity of the text. If you cannot bring one chapter like it, then it must be not of human endeavour, but of supernatural endeavour. Now, when we look at non-Quranic Arabic text, we find that it falls neatly in two sections, prose and poetry. Now, prose is subdivided into saj'a and mursal. Mursal is straight speech, like I'm speaking now, like we read in the newspapers. Saj'a is basically rhymed prose, much like our poetry in English. Now, poetry is also is known as al-bihar, which means the sea. Now, this has 16 rhythmical patterns, patterns which almost represent mathematical structures, where the emphasis is on the actual letter. Now, what we find is that the Quran does not fit into those known categories of prose and poetry, but it is actually unique. Christina Nelson, who received her PhD from California University, writes, "Although some of the lines of the Quran may be scanned according to the classical Arabic meters, these are not as characteristic of the Quranic syllabic rhythmic patterns." The famous Arabist from the University of Oxford, Hamilton Gibbs, was very outspoken about his views about the Quran. He says, "As a literary monument, the Quran thus stands by itself, a production unique to Arabic literature, having neither forerunners nor successors in its own idiom." So we have good reasons to believe that the Quran is actually unique and does not fit into those known categories. Now, the question is this. This challenge was set at the time where the 7th century Arabs were very much in a good position to beat this challenge, and they had very good reasons to beat this challenge because they really didn't like Muhammad, peace be upon him, for various reasons. What you have to understand is that in the time of Muhammad, peace be upon him, Arabic poetry was regarded as the highest art form. You see, you have to understand that the Arabs were a barbarous bunch, but all that they had was poetry to be proud of. Now, poetry was used in contests where it could make or break an individual. Ibn Rashid has noted that the Arabs would only congratulate each other when there was a birth of a new child and when a poet arose amongst them, indicating just how much stature was attributed to those apt in Arabic poetry. So the question is, were they successful? No, they weren't. The Orientalist E.H. Palmer writes, "The best of Arab writers have never succeeded in producing equal in merit to the Quran itself." The famous scholar of Arabic, A.J. Arbi, also writes, "The challenge was taken up during Muhammad's lifetime, and the surviving specimens of emulation do nothing to undermine the Quran's claim to inimitability. Neither do the crude parodies put out by later writers." Now, the philosophical framework is this. There are a finite amount of letters and grammatical laws in the Arabic language. What the Quran does is to be a literary form which is unique and cannot be replicated. So we have good reasons to believe after 1,400 years that the Quran is not of human endeavour but of supernatural endeavour. And we can summarise the arguments as follows. Prose and poetry are inside the productive capacity of the Arabic language. The Quranic literary form is unique and does not fit into the known divisions of the Arabic language. Therefore, the Quran is outside of the productive capacity of the Arabic language. Now, those are my 4 arguments for this evening. There are many, many arguments. For Philip Nathan to show that God does not exist, he must first, because he's a confessed atheist, he must first knock down the 4 arguments that I put forward this evening, and also put forward his own arguments. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, hi, Philip Nathan here. Can I just start with a question? Adam, are you listening? There's a bottle of water over there on the end of the table. Could you tell me how it got there?
It just appeared by itself.
Well, it's real. No, it's real good humour, but the fact is you don't know. And when it comes to questions like the Big Bang, the origins of the universe, perhaps I don't know might be the best answer. Perhaps we're looking into it, we're trying to find out. Perhaps I don't know is the kind of answer that perhaps Adam should have given, rather than going for a laugh. I am apparently a confessed atheist. Don't you love the language? Confessed. I have to confess. You have to confess your sins, don't you? I tell you what, I am a proud humanist. I don't believe in any gods, but I'm a humanist. Do you know what humanism is? No. Do you know much about it? Okay. Humanists have a positive philosophy of life, a positive set of beliefs which we believe provides a moral framework in which we can live good, moral lives. It's a profoundly moral philosophy about how we should live together as a society and how we should live as individuals. As humanists, we are interested in supporting the well-being and happiness of all others, regardless of sex, religion, colour. We want to enjoy our lives, we want to live fulfilled and complete lives, and we are concerned with the well-being, the happiness and welfare of humanity. And we believe that this well-being and happiness can be achieved by human effort alone. Yes, we think we have one life, and we're living it now. This is it. This is our life, the one that we're living now in this particular room at this very moment. The one we will live this evening, tomorrow, the day after. And we don't believe that there's any life after we die. We have one life, we are living it now. We see no evidence, and I've certainly heard no arguments tonight, for life after death, for heavens, for hells, for reincarnations and other forms. For humanists, we live, we die, we're buried, we're burned or whatever, and that is that. We don't believe in any gods, not the Islamic gods, the Hindu gods, the Christian gods, the Norse gods, not any gods. For us, there are no gods. We don't accept supernatural explanations for existence. We don't follow any sacred texts, not the Quran, not the Bible, not the teachings of Buddha, not the writings of Ron Hubbard or Reverend Sun Myung Moon. We value reason, experience, evidence, rational thinking, but we value the arts. We value theatre, dance, sculpture, painting, literature, and we value science and technology, though not without reservations, the gifts that science and technology can bring to our society. So, I'm a humanist, okay? Yes, I don't believe in God, but I'm a humanist first. Yes, there are no gods, that's true. 5 things in summary: positive and constructive philosophy, supporting the welfare and well-being of everybody, thinking based in reason, experience and evidence, one life, this is it, and no belief in supernatural gods, and no belief in sacred texts. So let me move to the motion, does God exist? Again, I prefer to be arguing a positive case for humanism and for a positive morality. However, humanists are known for not believing in any gods, and this is the motion under discussion. So let me make my position and the position of humanism entirely clear. Being now, no doubt there are no gods. There is no God. There is no afterlife. There are no heavens, there are no hells, there are no rewards after death or punishments for what you do in your life now. There are no angels, there are no supernaturally inspired miracles, there never have been. As I said, this is the one life we have. We have to live a good life, work for our fellow human beings now. We have to work every day to have a fulfilled, decent, caring, good life, enjoying ourselves and supporting others, and we have to do it now. There are no rewards in an imaginary hereafter. How do we know that anything exists? We can say that a book exists. I can see it, open it, touch it, laugh and cry because of it. These are the qualities we can say of something that exists. A virus exists. I can see a virus through a microscope. I can see the diseases it causes. I can do tests which tell me which type of virus it is. We can develop antiviral drugs. We believe there is a common cold virus. We can see people having the symptoms of the illness. We can see its consequences. Scientists have photographed these viruses. We can test for their presence and absence using biological, biochemical tests. So here we have again the qualities of something we can say exists. And what about something more abstract, something we can't touch? For example, love. Love exists. We can feel love. We can see its consequences. We know we feel love. We can't see it, but love is there. Through the words, I love you, through feelings of love, through the consequences of love. And love, in its many guises, is a common experience that we all share. Love is an emotion, feeling, and it's there in all of us. So here we have qualities of something that we can say exists. Does God exist? Well, first of all, we need to define what people mean when they claim there is a God. I thought Adam put a good argument for there being a beginning, but I don't think he could jump from that to what people claim to be a God, because the reality is that people are not claiming simply that some supernatural, invisible being exists, which started things off. No, they're claiming that such an entity exists, but not only that this God is all-powerful, that it influences and affects the real world. It affects your lives, your life, and the lives of others. And they say you must pray to this God, because if you don't pray, this God might get angry. They are saying that this God does get angry, that this God is forgiving and loving, but is also vengeful, that this God had a son. They are saying that this God gives rewards and gives out punishments. They are saying that this God is a male. Well, certainly not a female. I think we heard Stephen talking about he, God as a he. Not only that, people say that this God is somehow good. It seems reasonable in passing to point out this image of God seems to bear in many ways a strong resemblance to a man. So this is what God believes are trying to claim. And in order to show such a God exists, these people must show it can be experienced by the common senses. They must be able to show that there are clear cause and effect relationships which involve this God, and that this God is good, angry, vengeful, or whatever. Not only must this demonstration be made, but it must be accepted by the reason-based community, not the majority, because showing something is true requires demonstration, interpretation, and reason. To my mind and the mind of humanists, no such reason, evidence, and experience-based demonstration has been presented. You see, I've never seen any God. The Islamic God, the Christian God, the Hindu God, the sun gods of Egypt, the Norse gods, the Greek and Roman gods. I have never had any reason to think that these or any other gods are present and have taken any action on anything. If this good God exists, when the tsunami came and took the children from the beaches of India and Sri Lanka, where was this God? Could not this all-powerful being come and save the children? When Nazi soldiers lined Jewish women and men up in front of ditches, or led women and babies into gas chambers, could not this all-powerful God have saved them? When Bosnian Serbs massacred young Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica, where was this God? Nowhere. Because there is no God. There are no gods. There's no point praying for your God's help, because there's nothing there. And anyway, all reputable studies show that prayer achieves nothing. The only way to get help, the only way to act to save people, to care for people, to look after them, is to do it yourself, to express love and care yourself, to take action yourself with others, to act with your community, society, to get things done. No God is ever going to help you, because there is no God there. What is presented as evidence comes from ancient books, the Quran, other texts from ancient Egypt, the Christian or Jewish Bible, all of which present a mixture of true and false accounts, false stories of gods, prophets, messiahs. Of course, these books are said to have been written by gods, or divinely inspired by gods. And so, of course, they say there is a God. But of course, the argument is circular, going round and round. Most importantly, these books are designed largely to get ordinary people to behave, but more importantly, to do as they are told. Islam, I am told, means submission. but there's nothing to submit to. Submission to the invisible, the non-existent. I would say don't submit to anyone, not priests, professors, imams, gods, kings, queens, sheikhs. Never submit. We must rule our own worlds. To whom is submission really being given anyway? Given that there are no gods, why do so many people believe there is, or at least belong to and support groups which believe in gods and promote the idea that this invisible thing exists? Well, let's start from the personal point of view. Why do people who believe in God believe in gods? Well, let's make a fairly obvious statement. Children who are born in Islamic countries, in Islamic societies, to Muslim parents, are very likely to end up as Muslims, believing in God and the Prophet Muhammad. Obviously, this is especially the case in some Islamic countries where it's against the law, apostasy, to change religion, punishable by death. And it is considered blasphemy, punishable by death, to say there is no God. In fact, when academic studies count up the number of people who belong to different religions, they count everyone in Islamic State as being a Muslim. But of course, we don't actually know what people believe. They're not free to say. And that was the case in Britain a few hundred years ago, 1579. A man called Matthew Hemount. He said, "The New Testament and Gospel of Christ is but mere foolishness, a mere fable that Christ is not God, or Saviour of the world, but a mere man, a shameful man, and an abominable idol, and that he did not rise again from the dead or ascend into heaven, and the baptism is not necessary, nor the sacrament of the body and blood of Christ." Of course, Catholics are supposed to believe in transubstantiation, that in the Catholic Mass, bread becomes the body of Christ and wine is blood. What he said was a crime punishable by death, and he was executed, burnt, because he said these things. We live in a better world now. Humanists believe heavily in freedom. We certainly believe that if people wish to and choose and practice a religion, that's their decision, and no bars should be put in their way, as long as these beliefs and practices do not damage the freedoms of others. But we do object to not letting children learn about other religions and belief systems. Education in our schools doesn't include information about humanism and non-religious belief systems, and it certainly should. Why should children and adults be deprived of the knowledge and information they need to make their own decisions? Getting back to my main point, people believe in God and their religion largely because they are brought up in that religion, attend schools in that religion, and are only taught about that religion. That religion is embedded in a social group, in the way people behave and live in that group. Escape from that religion can be difficult in families, communities and states because rejecting religion is seen as rejecting that community, family and much more. But of course it should be no such thing. The reality that children in Buddhist societies, I've lived in Sri Lanka, in Buddhist countries they're likely to end up as Buddhists. In the UK, where the state is linked to the Church of England, around 24 million people say they belong to the Church of England. It's clear that the religion that someone ends up with or in is largely conditioned by the religion of the society, culture they were brought up in. And this is especially true in countries where no other religion is allowed. I'm not sure of your experience in Islam, but I think it's very likely that from an early age that there is a God, that you're taught that there is a God. And it's taught to you as an incontrovertible fact, not as something which is to be debated. You're taught this maybe from the age of 5 or earlier, before you've developed the capacity to evaluate and develop significant independent judgment. But not only that, Islam is bound up with everyday praying 5 times a day, through language like the common God willing, alhamdulillah, just as everybody in English will say, oh my God. So the idea of God is deeply embedded in people, even though there are no gods. Yes, religion... Sorry? Religion is in fact everywhere. I went to the bar upstairs and I thought I'd get a bar of chocolate, and of course it's a divine bar of chocolate that you can buy. So religion is, as we can see, there is my divine chocolate, which I'm going to eat later on. Who does God... One more minute? Really? Okay, what can I dash through? Okay, I would just want to add that religion largely serves the purpose of powerful groups, okay? It's not just about power, of course. People in religions get a sense of belonging, identity, companionship, oneness, if not common purpose. Indeed, the term religion derives from the idea from the word religare, to bind together, and that is undoubtedly one reason for religion. But that does not make religion reasonable or rational. It's not only religion that does this, other things do that as well. Let me finish then, because I have limited time, apparently. People put a number of arguments for believing in God, but there's no evidence for belief in any God. There's no evidence in our lives for any supernatural being intervening in our day-to-day existence. Around 50% of the people in the Northeast do not believe in any gods. Why believe in something you can't see, feel, hear, something which does nothing for anyone, and for which there is no evidence of any acceptable kind? Of course there are no gods. And I say to you that living life without any such gods, without belief in supernatural forces, is a great way to live. There is no psychological burden of wondering what a non-existent God thinks of what you're doing, and wondering whether you'll go to live in a heaven or hell after you die. Instead, you get on with your life. Hell, heaven, these places don't exist. They come from very vivid imaginations. When we die, we're buried in the ground, and that is that. We live on.
Sorry.
I think that deserves another minute. Put me off this slide.
Quick, turn it off. Quick.
We live on through the echoes of the things we did in our lives, through our children, through the good deeds and the bad we've done. That is all. That's how we live after we die, and that is good. There are no rewards in an imaginary heaven. There are no rewards for being poor and humble in your life. Who does that suit? Our rulers. And there's no punishment for doing wrong after death. We have one life, we're living it now. It's to be enjoyed now. It's to be used now, because that's all that there is. I submit to you that there are no gods, and that our society, people as individuals, would be far better off if there were no belief in these gods. Thank you.
Each speaker will have another 5 minutes to discuss what the other speakers have said. So I'll bring on Dr. Stephen first to have his first 5 minutes. Stephen, I think it's me. Okay, brother Adam wants to go first. So.
In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Thanks for that, Philip. Not sure where to start, but just bear with me here. Listen to Philip's arguments, and I have to say, not very impressed. I haven't seen any good arguments against the position that I've tried to maintain this evening, and also any arguments for atheism. Philip says that we have not seen any evidence this evening. Not sure if you were listening, Philip, but I presented 4 arguments this evening, and all 4 were deductive arguments, and the way to show those arguments are false is by showing either that it's an invalid argument or the premises are false, and you haven't done any of that so far. He also says that he values reason and science. However, I haven't seen any reason or science on his part this evening. So we still have to see some kind of arguments this evening. All I've seen this evening are just claims. God doesn't exist. Humanism is right. Atheism is true. These are claims, they're statements. We need some argumentation this evening. I think he does owe us this evening to show some kind of argument. Okay, so what did I put forward this evening? I said that God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe. I put forward the Kalam cosmological argument. Philip said Adam showed that the universe has a beginning, and he said, well, we don't know. Well, you're actually wrong there, Philip. We do know. There is an immense amount of empirical evidence. In 1929, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe was expanding because of the redshift. We also had the discovery of the CMB, the cosmic background radiation, which shows that which is kind of radioactive relic of the universe. Also, more importantly, in 2003, leading cosmologists Arvin Bourne, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe that has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. Vilenkin writes, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." So it is confirmed scientifically and philosophically that the universe has a beginning. So the first argument still stands this evening. We haven't seen any counter-argument. I also argued that God is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe. Didn't hear any arguments on the part from Philip to undermine that argument, so that argument still stands this evening also. He also spoke about humanism and about living a happy life and somewhat of a moral life. Well, I have a quote here by Richard Dawkins. You're a fan of Richard Dawkins, I presume? Philip? You're a fan of Richard Dawkins?
His logic, maybe in his thinking in some ways, yes.
Yes. Well, yes. Well, Richard Dawkins says there is no design, no good, no bad, no purpose, pointless indifference. We are machines propagating DNA. It is every living soul reason for being. No good, no bad, none of that. So I still, the moral argument this evening, that still stands. He hasn't shown that objective morality exists in the absence of God. I also argued that the Quran, that God is the best explanation for the authorship of the Quran. I haven't really heard any arguments of what I put forward this evening. Now, any arguments for atheism? Spoke about the problem of evil, about the tsunami, and etc., etc. What I would say here is that Philip has taken an shouldered an immense burden of proof. He has to show that the problem of evil is true, that it's an objection to the existence of God. He has to show that it is improbable that God can have morally sufficient reasons to have suffering in human relations. He has to show that. He has to demonstrate that. He can't just appeal to emotion and argue from that point. Also, I think it's important here to mention that in order to recognize evil and suffering, he has to show that objective morality exists in the absence of God. How does he know that? He has to present it first and then argue from that point onwards. Since he hasn't shown that objective morality exists in the absence of God, then that argument falls apart. He also argued that most people are born into religion. But I ask you folks, how does that prove that God does not exist? How is that an argument? In logic, that is called the genetic fallacy. That is to say that you invalidate an argument based upon where it originates. You invalidate an argument based upon where it originates. That's like saying, if I woke up and I had a dream and worked out how gravity works. And when I wake up, I present it to Philip and say, gravity exists. And he says, no, it doesn't, because you saw it in a dream. You didn't conduct an experiment. That is called the genetic, and that's, in a sense, the same thing that's happening here. Just because you show that some people believe in God because they're born into religion, it does not follow logically that God does not exist. So those are my arguments, and those are some of the arguments that say that Philip has presented. I think it still stands this evening that God does exist. He has to show that the arguments that I've shown this evening do not stand, and we haven't seen that on his part. Neither have we seen good arguments for atheism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Next, I'll bring on Dr. Stephen for 5 minutes to give a account.
Thank you very much. And I want to go back to some of what I said for a start. I'm going to establish the fact that indeed it is impossible not to conceive of a God who exists. And listening to Yes, listen to Philip, and I actually struggle to see any point, any argument that actually undermines this particular position. I think what I found Philip saying are simply just rhetorics of what humanism is all about, but actually not actually arguments engaging with some of these things. I think Philip does seem to be content simply with "I don't know," and I struggle to understand that. If you do not know, then obviously that does indicate a problem with the level of reasoning, because then you could not see behind that. But what we offer here is the fact that there is God who is behind what you do not know, and God who is actually the cause of whatever it is that you can think about, the chains of causes in the world. And so Philip really hasn't defended that particular position, neither has he worked against it. So what happens to the law of causality? Philip hasn't responded to that at all. I think I'm also worried when Philip talks about moral philosophy and humanism. And I see Philip's argument as proposing a kind of recipe for disaster and anarchy. If you live in the world where you think about human well-being is through your own effort, and you do not have to submit to any authority, you do not have to listen to any authority, not to the queen, not to the professor, not to everybody, then I think even here tonight we're in trouble, because we'll not be able to coordinate ourselves. Everybody will simply go on their own way. And how Philip's argument actually disproves the existence of God remains to be seen, and I'm not convinced about that either. Talk about whether there is heaven, whether there is hell, and how that again could be used as an argument against the existence of God remains to be seen for me. I just feel a bit surprised that Philip talks about the love which they cannot see. How you love other people and you feel love and you cannot see it and you cannot experience it. And I find that is one of those vacuums that you find in Philip's own argument, that because you have not got any root, any establishment for demonstration of that love, then it falls so easily, because the motive behind your action or that love is selfish. But I find within the Christian ministry, the Christian theology, religious thinking, that there is a God who shows love to his people. And indeed, in times of crisis, in times of troubles, this God is still there and gives you love. And that love helps you in relationship with other people. I think if all we are looking for is a God that you can put in the test tube, then I think there is no God in that. The argument we have talked about is God who is the ground of all beings, God who is the unmoved mover. And if God is the unmoved mover, God who is the ground of all beings, then surely he goes beyond something you can put in the test tube, something you can put under experiment and examine as to whether he's gray, is dark, whatever his stature might be. And I don't think that when you come to objectivity, you must be willing to agree with the fact of what is there and what you see that you can simply not prove enough of it or have not enough evidence does not mean it does not exist. There is existence, even if you cannot. The fact that you can think about him means that he exists. I want to just again go back to the Philip's argument about the problem of evil, and again he hasn't actually demonstrated how that does undermine the existence of God. How do you imagine a God who does not exist if you are still thinking about the problem of evil? If God does not exist, you will not be able to think about him in the first instance. And the problem of evil doesn't in any way negate the fact of God who is the creator of the universe. And now this is not to confuse the freedom, the free human will that God has also given to people. And this is different, and it does not in any sense negate the fact that God himself does exist. And so Philip will need to show more to be able to establish that the problem of evil does undermine God's own existence rather than the workings in the world. And it talks about believing something that you cannot see. And I think this is the essence of belief in itself. So if all you are looking for is what you cannot see, then you do not actually wait. You do not need to believe in that, because what you can see can change. And we talk about the God who is the maker of the heavens and the earth. The God who himself does not change, but is able to relate to the changing circumstances of life. And this is the God who is there and who does not change. So it's a strange one when Philip says, well, you cannot believe in something you cannot see. But we're not even simply talking here about a non-existent creature, but we're talking about the creator of the universe. And for us, the standpoint of the Christian perspective is to believe first, and then you seek to experience him as you go along. And this, for me, is very important. And I think, really, there is no argument to show that God does not exist. But with all we've been saying, I think there is more evidence to in fact demonstrate that God, who does exist, is the one who has made the world in which we live, and there is a lot of things to see in the world. We show God who is behind all the situations and circumstances. And just one more last point, which I think is worth pointing out, because Philip has talked about people simply believing in God because they've been brought up in that particular religion. And I think that fails actually to recognize people who have not been brought up in a particular religion, and yet they are searching and they still go on to look for God and they believe in God, from whatever faith or no faith at all. And there are people who have actually come out of their position, who have searched and they have found God. So, and I think to say that is to actually undermine the experience of many people who have personal experience of the divine, who have personal experience, personal relationship with the ultimate God. And so you cannot simply say that people believe because they've been brought up that way. There are lots and lots of people who are not brought up that way, but they have grown into having a relationship with God. And indeed, this is because there is a personal relationship there. And I want to submit once again that God does exist, and in fact there is everything to show for that. He himself is the evidence for his existence.
Bit forward.
I suppose, can I start first of all by correcting the comments of Stephen, that I definitely said that we do feel love, that love exists, and there's evidence for love existing, that I feel love, and that we all feel love. And humanists feel love, and humanists behave in moral ways. And it's often a claim put by maybe the Archbishop of York made the claim. The Archbishop of York made the claim recently that that if you don't have religion, you've got no morals. Well, I can point to hundreds and hundreds of humanists locally who work for Amnesty International. We, as a North East humanist, we support a school in another country bringing education to many children who otherwise wouldn't receive that education. We work we supported charities locally helping refugees. There's so many things that humanists do. We have morality, we have families, we love each other and we look after each other. And we look after others too. We work against the BNP, many of my colleagues do. We work as counsellors locally. There are many things that humanists engage in which I would say is behaviour which would largely be seen as moral. But none of those people believe in any God. But morality is there. And I suppose in terms of morality, if as a society we weren't moral, if we didn't have customs, if we didn't have ways of dealing with each other which were successful, we simply wouldn't be here as a society. If we were antisocial, if we killed each other randomly, if there were no codes, if there was no conduct, then there would be no society. So it's as a result of moral behaviour that we're here. If there were no moral behaviour, we simply wouldn't be able to sit in a room together, would we? We'd be stealing, killing, doing so many different things that would mean that there could be no society. So morality has its origins in the fact that we need to get on with each other. Adam seemed very sure. I think about objectivity. He talks about, having something which is morally objective. I strain myself just to define what objectivity means. I must say, I teach various subjects, we're supposed to look at things objectively, but I'm not. I still remain, I'm very happy with I don't know. As I go through life, the things I believed yesterday seem less true. The things that people believed 100 years ago, now we have completely different ideas. And I think I don't know is quite is a position that I'm happy with. I teach a class in one way because I believe something at one time, and then I learn a bit more. And then I find out something different, and I'm happy with not knowing, and that helps me to engage in a continuous search to find out what the truth is and what the best ways of doing things are. And Adam talked about objective morality, you know, and he said God provides the reason for this. But people who believe in God do so many different things, don't they? I can remember Raymond of Aguilera from the 11th century. I remember it well, I was there. No, I wasn't. Rejoicing at the bloodshed of Muslims after a siege of Jerusalem. He talks about the killing going on for days and days afterwards. And at the end of the killing, after everyone, it took days for the killing to end, after everyone was beheaded. Those were religious people. You know there were religious people who flew jets into the Twin Towers. According to their morality, that was a great thing to do. But there were Quakers who rescued Jewish people from the Nazis. There are tremendous people from Christianity and from Islam who've done the most wonderful, caring things. But I would submit that that doesn't come from religion, it comes from being good people. It comes from being, moral people. That can be informed. Certainly there are religious texts which you can use to inform your good behaviour. But I think we can see, as I've demonstrated, religious people behave in different ways. There is no objective morality. Don't you think the people who bombed the Twin Towers, unfortunately, the Muslims who engage in excellent conduct and behaviour, the people who organise this meeting today in such a wonderful way, that they're not seeing religion, they're seeing beliefs subjectively? Why these different interpretations? And I'm willing to listen to what has to be said about that, because I don't know, but I see some inconsistency. I did deal with Adam's arguments about cosmology. I said, all right, perhaps he says we know. Well, I really haven't looked at all the literature myself, and it looks as he's looked at it in more depth than I have. But I thought he argued for a beginning, but not the jump from the kind of God that everyone conceives of as being a God. I also felt, and I felt that was a problem with the logic of Adam's argument. He talks about logic and philosophy, but he didn't tell us what God is. God exists, but he didn't start telling us what it is. When you make a claim in philosophy and logical thinking, you have to actually outline what you're talking about. And I didn't get what kind of God? Is it some God that controls morality? Is that what he sees? Because, establishing that there was a beginning of the universe, it's a tremendous leap from there to depicting the God that people tend to believe in, one that influences the world as it is. Anyway, in the world I think I live in, you have to show that things exist. I don't have to disprove that things exist. This is the logic in rational argument in our thinking systems. You have to show that something is actually the case. If someone proposes a new particle in physics, then they have to provide evidence for it. They have to show it. If I say there's a new virus that exists, I provide people with evidence of it. It's not up to other people in the initial to say that it doesn't exist. It's up to people who believe that things exist to show them. Sorry, am I out of time? Can I finish the final point? I think animals do show moral behaviour. There are examples. I know that certain types of bird will give their lives for their flocks, apparently, from what I hear. That there are certain codes in the animal kingdom as well. Lionesses will love their mothers, maybe will love their children, look after them. I don't know if it's the love as we know it, but there are certain ways of behaving that exist in animal communities. And with regard to design, as I was discussing a little bit earlier, the world isn't designed to fit us. We fit in with the design. We have evolved and changed. And if the design was different, we would, if the way the world was different, we would have to evolve differently to suit the world. That's how it works. Thank you.
My question is about, I just wanted to ask, you said that you're labeling according to their religion for what they do, like you said about the Twin Towers. And I wanted to ask you a question. question. Harold Shipman was not of any religious belief, he did not religious people.
I didn't label people in any such way. Sorry.
Crimes.
I didn't label people in any such way. I have many Muslim friends, Muslims, all kinds of people. I've lived in a Muslim country and had a wonderful time, and the people were wonderful. I was exemplifying the fact that people with the same apparent religious belief who believe in God will do things which are apparently of completely opposite morality, at least in my book. For me, attacking people in that kind of way is completely immoral. Yet loving people and looking after them as so many Muslims do, and the vast majority by any sense, it is absolutely wonderful. Okay, so there's no labelling going on from me.
Going back to the morality, Philip made some points about morality in his rebuttal. We need to have some clarification here. My argument was not that atheists do not exhibit moral behaviour. You don't have to believe in God to be moral. What I'm arguing is that morality doesn't exist without God. All that morality, our notions of morality, be good and evil, are just illusions. There's nothing real about them. Now, Philip also said that, interesting, is that he said, look, we only have one life, and that's all that we have. Well, if you only have one life, then how could there be good reasons to give up your own interest for someone else? Why would you give up your own interest? Why would you give money for charity if you only have one life and all that you have to think about is yourself? Why would a person do that and be reasonable? As long as you, if you don't get anything in return, why would anyone give up their own potential interest? I'd like to hear a response to that this evening, hopefully. Whereas the theist, it makes sense, because we're compensated in the hereafter. We're compensated because we act good and moral. He also said about objective morality, he says, we don't know. Well, that's quite dangerous, because when you say we don't know or objective morality doesn't exist, then what about the Holocaust? Was the Holocaust not objectively morally evil? Are you saying you don't know that there could be a possibility that it could be a good act? What does that mean? It's quite a dangerous position to be in. He also spoke about the religious religious members that killed, for example, the Twin Towers. Indiscriminate killing, he said, in so many words. But what Philip doesn't understand is that without objective morality, none of those things are wrong. All of those things are morally neutral. Whether you show love to someone or whether you kill someone, it's equal. It's morally equal. If you do not have objective morality, there is no standard. He also said about animals. He said, well, yes, animals are moral and they show love, for example. Oh, that's interesting, but what about acts like rape, infanticide, and incest? What about those acts? Why can't we have them in human relations also? Sorry.
Can we
It's a good question and answer. Extra rebuttals. That is not fair.
Well, it was a question about morality.
No.
Well, it was. It was about religious people. But let's give Philip a rebuttal. I mean, it's fine. Please ask Philip if you'd like to.
No, I cannot. Yeah, if I can, I'll deal with that.
Yeah, just to be fair.
Well, people do moral things. You know, when I was young, somebody fell in a river and I pulled them out. I do give money to charity, and the humanists I'm talking about do actually do these things. So, you know, and they don't believe in any gods. So these things. Well, it's a feeling inside, isn't it? It's having morality, but I don't believe in God. And I think you need to, and it seems that, just if I can just say, respond to the point there, it seems that Adam's saying that you do God good because you'll get a reward after you die. Well, that's not doing good. That's, that's investing for the future, isn't it? Humanists do good with no prospect of reward in the long run.
Question, please?
Yes.
I believe in something. I don't put a name to God, but it will be. My question is, for both Adam and Philip, did this being, we call him God, did he create us? Or did we create him?
Philip and Adam was up.
So Adam, me. Well, that would be true if you show that the Kalam cosmological argument that God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe was false. If you show that that God is the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the universe is false. If you show that God is the best reason for objective morality is false. If you show that God is the best explanation for the authorship of the Quran. If you showed all that, then I would agree with you. But that doesn't stand this evening.
My view is that people created God to explain things they didn't understand. They had questions like, where do we come from? You know, what's life about? What am I here for? And they posited, I don't know, through history, the idea that there was this God that existed. And perhaps it was taken on, well, it was certainly taken on by people with authority and power in order to bolster their particular positions in the world. For example, we know, religions tend to be hierarchical. You listen to people at the top. The first Christian conference, I think in Nicaea, in 420, was overseen not by a religious official, but by the Emperor Constantine, who wanted to expand his power base within the Roman Empire and used Christianity to help him do it. I think there are plenty of other examples where so my view is that, I think maybe anthropologists would back this up, that religion was devised in order to explain things that people didn't understand. Okay.
Next question. Dr. Answer.
Just wanted to address this on the issue of the problem of evil. And you said that when the tsunami happened, if there was a God, he should have intervened. And because of that, there isn't any God at all. Right? So and you used the massacre of the Bosnians by the Serbian Bosnian Jews, Bosnian Serbs as an example. But if you look at the history of that, there were Dutch UN soldiers in Srebrenica. They did not intervene. So are you saying that because they didn't intervene, they were not there?
Is that a question for Philip? Thank you.
I'm a bit confused by the last point, but perhaps you can clarify that. I certainly think because these things happen, there certainly isn't any good God.
No.
Children on the beach, playing sport, playing cricket on Indian beaches, children enjoying themselves in the sun, and they're swept out away to sea, maybe smashed by pillars, rocks, or whatever it is, and they die, and someone tells me there's a good God around who's looking after them. That's something I just can't accept.
You're just invoking this emotive image.
Well, because that's very emotional for me, I must say. It's very emotional.
The point I'm making is that there were soldiers there, all right? They did not intervene. So that means that they did not exist.
They did. You said they were there, which is an assumption.
The same applies to the Rwandan conflict in 1994. There were UN soldiers there. They did not intervene. Okay, about almost 1 billion people, millions of people were killed. They did not intervene. They had their reasons for not intervening. But are you saying that because they didn't intervene, they didn't exist?
Unfortunately, the falsehood is in your assumption. You said they were there. So the rest of it, unfortunately, the rest of your question falls. They jolly well should have intervened. They should have helped those people. They should have taken action, military action if necessary, to protect those Muslims from being slaughtered.
Why can't you accept that God must have his reasons for not intervening against and redeeming people from the tsunami?
So we're talking about... You see, in moral terms, God is letting these children die. I say we should take action. We should put in place safety systems which already exist around the world, and ensure that those children don't die. Obviously, I'm confounding what your God obviously has reasons for doing. But for me, killing those children, and I'm very, very saddened that people would applaud that and say that God has a good reason for killing children. I note the story of Abraham as well, I guess, which is celebrated at an Eid festival, isn't it? Where Abraham was almost ready to kill his own child because of his faith. And I think killing children is absolutely awful.
Next question. Yes, you.
My question is that Allah says in the Quran many times, it reflects upon the universe. Like, if you look at the sun, when it rises and it sets, how can you describe, like, how can you even explain the function of the universe? If you look at a factory, for example, and you have a line manager, he has to run the line and ensure that everything's running smoothly. Just as the universe, how do you explain the different functions of the universe?
Well, the question is asked in terms which I find, quite difficult to cope with the different functions of the universe. We live in this universe, the sun comes up and the sun goes down, and that's the way it is. And in 60 billion years' time, our own sun will explode and that won't be happening anymore. And maybe deeper into the future, the whole universe will contract and there'll be another big bang. This is the way it is.
I think that's the issue. I think you said earlier, you took the negative view of Islam when you said that the word Islam meant submit or submission. That words got two different meanings.
Yeah, I think we had...
The alternative meaning is the submission of an argument. If you're talking about the world, where there's more than one religion, you might have a council of religions, and that religion might have been created as a new religion in submission to that council of religions. And I think when you look at it in terms of that view, you would have laws that are created from the religion, and those laws are objective measures of God, and actually objective proof of an objective standard of moral behaviour for a whole race of people. So that is your proof of God. You've also got universal organisations like the United Nations that represent universal beliefs of the whole world that have been found over the infinite event, or not the infinite events of the past, but at least the last 3,000 years in world trade and world wars even. I don't even think that the panel tonight represented the truth of the history of philosophy. There are very detailed works in philosophy dating back to Pythagoras, Socrates and Aristotle, and even St. Thomas Aquinas, that are particularised and generalised to the actual universe, individual types of human behaviour which you refer to as evils, which are actually objectively measurable in labs. Human emotions and brain activity actually monitorable in labs. I'm not satisfied that anyone on the panel tonight is actually representing the truth about God to anybody here, let alone Islam or Hindus or Christians. Because we do have a political system.
Okay, we'll move on now, sorry.
And we hold referendums on people's morality, and that is proof of God. People, even atheists, can sit on a jury and decide between them and agree on what's right and wrong. There are 15 people that share the same notion of what is right. It's not objectively measurable, we can't see it, it's not tangible, or it exists now with us.
Can we move on, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? I'll give the lady there. Thank you. Yeah. Can you speak up, please? Who's a question directed to?
I suppose, unfortunately, primarily to Philip.
Okay.
I just feel as though you're getting an overload, but perhaps that's a good thing because we can also learn from listening to each other and the questions and answers. At least I hope we are all willing to listen and learn. But it's because I have been listening to you, Philip, that part of me felt, I don't know whether to say saddened or aggrieved, but you do seem to have the notion that if you were brought up in a particular religion, then that is that. You will behave and think like that for the rest of your life and not look at others and listen to them, and in a lot of cases convert or give up. So it seems to be very limiting your understanding of people and their beliefs. And I also feel that there are some very fundamental flaws in your presentation. Unfortunately, there isn't time to cover them all, but there is an old expression comes to my mind, and unfortunately I can't recall the author and dates, but it's, with faith no explanation is necessary, without faith no explanation is possible.
I said, in general, when people are brought up in a religion, they tend to stay in it. And I think that's absolutely and vastly the case. People do change, people do give up on religion, but I would imagine that almost everyone who is brought up a Hindu in India basically is going to stay with that religion, and almost everyone who is a Muslim is going to stay with that religion. There may be longer changes over time, but I think that is clearly the case, and especially in countries where you aren't even allowed to change a religion, and you're not allowed to express other beliefs. With faith, no explanation is necessary. Well, I don't have faith, and I'm always looking for answers and explanations and reasons. And that's an absolute imperative, yes. I'm also always trying to find out why, try to find out what's going on, and to take myself forward into a new state of knowledge and a new state of being.
One more question. Is it for first?
It's actually for everyone.
Everyone, okay.
I think I've been brought up religion all my life, actually Jewish, and I've heard all these arguments back and forth, whether it's Islam, it's Jewish, Christian, it's really irrelevant. I think the mistake that everyone's trying to make tonight is trying to prove religion. I think there's what you said, there's a faith. Without faith there's no proof, and you need that leap of faith to every religion. Try to prove it mathematically or scientifically, and I know you're quite a good speaker, Adam, and you've got the gift and you've got the doubt and all that, but you haven't proved that God. You proved there's something out there, you proved there is other forces, and you proved also, but prove there's God. You can't need that leap of faith. I think no one mentioned it until just now. Without a good faith, there is no God. And so there's questions. There's lots of questions about. Everyone's got questions about where it came from.
Yeah. Sorry, what was your name? Josh. Josh, I would agree with you that we can't prove God exists. Proof is a term that is used in a mathematical sense. However, I will say this, that we have more reasons, and we have good reasons to believe that God exists. Some of us have spoken about yes, and we've shown that there is something out there, but we don't know what it is, and etc. But the very fact that I've shown there's something outside of time and space means that Philip cannot argue convincingly that God does not exist. Moreover, it has to be a personal being. Why does it have to be a personal? Why? Let me explain. Because for the cause to exist eternally, and have a temporal effect, it must be an eternal cause that freely chose to bring the temporal effect. For if the cause was a mechanical kind of device, whatever that may be, then the cause could not exist without the effect being eternal. Since we know that the universe is temporal, therefore the cause must be a personal one to freely choose to bring the universe into existence. Second point, I demonstrated this evening that the universe was delicately and exquisitely fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life. That means there must be a mind of a designer behind it, an intelligence. If you can imagine having 100 dials, and they all have to be calibrated, an intelligent mind must be able to calibrate that to bring the universe into existence. Now remember, I did not assume that God exists. I put forward some deductive arguments which suggest very strongly that there must be an all-powerful being that is outside of time and space, non-material, and also intelligent, and also communicates with us via the Quran.
Let me just clarify this quickly. I don't know if you heard me well about this, but actually that was my starting point. The question of faith is very important, and I did refer to Anselm of Canterbury, whose particular theological premise was that of faith seeking understanding. And so I do agree, and that's actually very important to my own submission, that yes, there is a lot to see that shows us that God does exist. And we are not here simply to prove that he exists, because God does exist, and there isn't so much that you can do actually to say he doesn't exist, however much Philip does say. But the point is that we agree, know that he exists, and on that basis then we seek to show that so many other reasons explain the fact that God does exist. And I'll just say one quick thing about Philip here. And I think there is a contradiction there between your I do not know, being content with I do not know, and refusal to agree that God does exist by faith. And I think there is a big contradiction there for you. And I'm not satisfied that you have actually dealt with that. If you are satisfied with I do not know, and you cannot find an answer to every problem, then why is it a problem for you to agree that God does exist simply by agreeing or by faith, which a lot of people do? And that's an issue there.
A good point. I don't say I don't know to every question. I have to live my life based on some assumptions. My turn. I have to live my life based on some assumptions, and my assumption is that there is no God. I see no evidence for it. You have your faith, and I have what I believe is that humanists have experience, reason, evidence. We see no evidence of this. This is how we live our lives. You know, we have our morality. In fact, I do believe in objective morality. I do believe that there are things which are right and wrong. But the ideas of what are right and wrong don't come from any belief in a non-existent God. There's this tremendous leap, isn't there? Because something exists out of time and space, somehow there is a God. Well, I said there's great trouble with defining what that God is. Because the way people view, you know, this could be anything. Because there's something out of time and space, I don't think there's been any evidence shown here tonight that there is a God. There's been speakers who've been trying to justify what they believe anyway. I find these philosophical arguments described, described in the correct way by this gentleman here. It's a lot of logical problems and all the rest of it. It just doesn't seem to add up to me, and there's no definition of what God was in the first place, which in philosophical logic, you have to define exactly what you're claiming, what your God is. But that would probably...
God is defined as everything. The creator of all things. And it's obviously
well, who gets angry and so has all this emotional stuff that controls the tsunami, has reasons for wiping children off the beach and all the rest of it. Well, the gentleman here talked about what God's reasons were. So, if this is a reasoning bee, I'd like to have that defined in the first place. I don't feel that those people who propose that God exists tonight have actually shown anything at all.
I have a question for Adam.
I have to finish off. We've all come back to had a chance to answer that point. And I think
finish off.
Yeah, well, you said last question.
No, I'll finish off now, sorry.
Been a long day for me.
So, yeah, afterwards, people and speakers are still here.
You can add up one time because you lost the question.
No, that's it. We have to finish off because we have to leave this place as well. I've gone over time as well.